And hello again, and welcome to part 2 of my Reboot series on my Moto Guzzi California 3 Cafe Racer project. So in this particular episode, there's a lot to do, and one job I've got to do is to work out the lengths and the routing of a new pair of brake lines to the front of the bike. And that's because both the brake lines I had and the front indicators had to be removed so I could mount this Le Mans Mark 1 fairing. And so to that end, in my hand here, I've got a bunch of unused or reused or spare brake lines of various bikes. I'm going to use these to try and work out the correct length of the brake lines I need, and also their routing, and also importantly the angle of the banjo bolts at each end, because you can specify that when you order the custom brake lines. So that's something I've got to do today. I've also got to work out how to mount the front indicators. So I'll be doing that by hopefully mounting them to a bracket here at the front of the bike, which currently holds the rectifier in place. And that's mimicking the way a Le Mans Mark 1 had its indicators mounted on the front of the bike. So there's 2 jobs I've got to do today. I've also got to continue with the wiring on the bike, because if you recall, I'd replaced the Moto Gadget M unit I had on the bike with a simpler and smaller electronic control box called a D-box by Axel Joost in Germany, which is now fitted to the bike. And I've sort of got halfway through wiring that up, and I must say it's not going too well at the moment because it's not reacting the way I think it should. Things aren't working correctly, so I need to do a bit more research on that, maybe look up what's going on, because as I say, it's not responding the way I think it should. So that's a job to do. Also, since the last video, I have completed the work on the battery tray and its brackets and so on. So it's over here now. Just pick it up. It's a heavy old thing. So I showed you that in part 1, pretty much finished all of the bracketry and so on, and I was going to get the whole thing hard anodized in silver, but I've not done that. Instead I've painted it. I painted it in an aluminium colour, at least the brackets anyway, whereas the thick 10mm tray it's sitting on, I've just brushed that into a sort of satin finish. Not sure you can see that, it's a bit difficult to show you. And I did that because, let's just put it down. I did that because it's about a 3 or 4 week lead time in getting those parts hard anodized at Camcoat locally, partly because it's such a small job. I mean, they have to wait until they're doing a lot more parts in that colour before they'll do my small batch of parts, and I didn't want to wait 4 weeks or more to get those parts done. Plus, of course, it's a lot cheaper just to do it yourself here at home. So although it looks the same, hopefully in the future it won't corrode. I don't have to worry about polishing it, so it's just fit and forget, and I can get that back on the bike. But I'm not going to fit it yet because it's going to get in the way. It's going to sit here below the electrics box on top of the gearbox. It'll get in the way of me working on the electrics for the time being, so it can stay off the bike for now. Right, so what's next then? And so let's get started by working on the brake lines. And so from my collection of brake lines, I found 2 that kind of work on the front end of the Guzzi. The black one at the back here, that's a bit too short, and the front one here, the silver one, is a bit too long. But that's okay because it gives me a good guide as to what the correct length should be. It's also clear that down here at the caliper, the banjo bolt needs to be angled back by quite a lot. This one's pretty much straight back, and as you can see, it gives a strange routing to the brake line. So if the banjo bolt came back a bit more, that routing will be much nicer. So now all I've got to do is order those brake lines from Hel, H-E-L. They cost around £35 per brake line. But that's before VAT and before postage. So a pair of brake lines is normally about £80 or £85. So when those brake lines arrive, we'll get them on the bike, and that's one more job completed. And so now let's talk about indicators. Now these indicators on the back of the bike, I quite like them. They're quite small and neat, a bit retro looking, but I've got a problem with them if I want to fit these indicators to the front of the bike. And that problem is that the stems are quite wide, and in fact they're sort of teardrop shaped, and that's a problem. And that's because to fit the 2 front indicators, they're going to have to be mounted to some kind of long rod or stem, which is bolted or welded to this aluminium bracket here, which is currently holding on the rectifier. So if you imagine I've got a rod something like that, but a bit bigger. So that's now welded to this bracket, and the indicators will be bolted to the end of that rod. And it's going to look really odd because this is a small round rod bolted to a stem on the indicator which is quite large and teardrop shaped. It's going to look really, really weird. So I can't fit those indicators to the front of the bike. Luckily, I do have an alternative, which is to use these, which actually were on the bike originally. As you can see, they've got stem, short stem with a threaded end, a nut on it. So if I source myself a suitable hollow tube, I can then tap a thread on the inside of that tube and then just screw in the indicator to the end of it, so it looks something like that. This, not this one, but the appropriate aluminium tube will then be bolted or welded to this aluminium bracket here, and hopefully it'll look okay when it's all finished. So now I've just got to go and find myself a suitable aluminium tube big enough so I can tap a thread on it to take these indicators, and hopefully it'll all look pretty good when it's finished. And so next then, about half an hour ago, this parcel turned up from hell, and in here were my custom brake lines for the front of the bike. So I've got them fitted, but sadly there is a problem. And the problem is, as you can see here on the bike, the banjo bolt at the base here is incorrect. Rather than bending up by 90 degrees this way, going straight up, it turns 90 degrees that way. So now the brakes bow out to the side of the bike rather than going back the way I wanted. So I've double checked my order, and it seems I've made a mistake. I ordered the brake lines online on their website. I was probably rushing a little bit when I did it, and I've got them mixed up. I've ordered the wrong banjo bolt, so I can't use these brake lines sadly. I'll have to order them again, this time with the correct angle on the banjo bolt. But not to worry, I'm sure these brake lines might come in handy one day on a different project. And now here we are, it's another day, and another box has turned up from hell. And in here should be the correct brake lines to fit on the front of the bike. So let's get the box open, get the brake lines on the bike, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I've not made any more mistakes and they fit just fine on the bike. And so here are the Mark II set of brake lines fitted to the front of the bike now, and I must say they do look a lot better. So this time I have got the correct 90 degree banjo bolt here, and that makes the route of the brake line a lot nicer. So you might notice that the two brake lines aren't quite symmetrical yet, because this one bows up a little bit more and that one's a bit less, and that's because I've got no keepers yet to keep the brake lines where they belong. Right now they're just sort of hanging wherever they want, so I need to get myself some keepers, and those keepers are little clamps that I can clamp both of the brake lines together behind the headstock here and just hold them at the correct position to give me a symmetrical pair of brake lines. So that's we'll call that a success. And right now, in fact, it's far too hot to be working out here. It's well over 30 degrees centigrade, which is far too hot for me. So that's it for now, and we'll continue when things get a little bit cooler. And so it's cooled down a bit, we've got a bit of shade, so I've come up with a cunning plan. And the cunning plan is to try and start the engine up even though the bike is far from finished, as you can see. So what I've done is I've got my big test battery here, the big 30 amp hour battery, and that's wired up to the starter motor down there. This little battery here is wired up to the starter solenoid, which is connected here through a wire down to the solenoid. So if I now connect this earth lead to my little battery here, that should activate the solenoid and make the starter motor turn over. I've not tried it out yet. I've also just put a little bit of petrol down these rubber hoses here going into the carbs. I'm not sure it's enough or not. And I've sprayed a little bit of petrol into the throats of the carb. I've also got another wire here which is coming from, well, it's going to a connection which in turn goes to power the coils. Now the ignition itself is a distributor, so it doesn't need any power. So in theory, if everything's set up okay, which it probably isn't, the engine should turn over, the spark should spark, and maybe it should fire up. Double fingers crossed, I've not done it yet. So if there's flames and smoke, you can blame me. In fact, putting a little bit of petrol here close to the batteries where there sparks isn't a good idea, so we'll put that on the floor and sort of step well back. So here goes, wish me luck. Well, it tried to start, didn't it? That's the first time the engine's turned over for something like 10 years. You see the bike rocking because the engine's turning over, and it's yeah, that's what Guzzis do. But yeah, let's just try it again. It's in neutral, thankfully. The bike didn't shoot off into the garage and destroy the place. And yeah, and a little red light came on then, so let's try again. Oh, you see there, it's starting to smoke. The starter motor needs so much power, even though this battery can supply it, these wires aren't thick enough. So I think I'll stop there and try and let's just unclip everything. We don't want any accidents with melted wires and smoke and God knows what else. In fact, that is bloody hot. Yeah, so the earth side definitely needs a thicker wire, and indeed the wire feeding the power into the battery is a really thick wire here that I fitted some time ago. So that's a kind of partial success. I've now got to go away and let's just unclip all these rather dubious connections I've made. I've now got to go away and make up some much thicker cables that I can clip to this battery into the bike, because as you saw then, that earth wire was starting to melt, and it's not exactly a thin wire, it's not exactly a thin cable, but that is now almost too hot to hold, so we'll give that a miss. So let me go away, make up some more cables using really thick wire, and hopefully this bike might turn up a bit quicker, and who knows, might start. Right, so we've got a syringe full of petrol, we've got the engine turning over, and I'll squirt it directly into the carb throats. So here we go again, wish me luck. Not sure how long this battery's going to last for, but there you go. Yeah, that didn't do anything, did it? So I'm pretty sure I'm not getting a spark, but at least I know the starter works pretty well, as does the starter solenoid. So that's something at least. So now what I think I'll do is I'll pull a plug out and just see if I can see a spark, but somehow I suspect I won't. Right, so once again I'm going to connect up the battery, then I'm going to whiz round and hold the spark plug against the engine, and we'll see if we can see a spark. So here goes. No, nothing at all, which is no surprise. That said, I've just remembered that these spark plugs are original to the bike, and I think they've seen better days. So I'm going to order some new spark plugs for the bike, something I should have done a long time ago. What are these? NGKR BPR 7ES. So I'll get some of them. Luckily, you just need 2 rather than 4. Get them on the bike. Not that that'll make a difference, but it's just eliminating a potential problem. And now here we are, it's a week later, and this aluminium tube has just arrived, and it's 14mm OD. So the idea is that I can screw these 2 indicators for the front of the bike into this tube, having put a thread on the inside, get this aluminium tube welded to the aluminium bracket that currently sits underneath the headstock, and we're all good. Except there's a problem. And that problem is, I think it'll look awful, it just won't look right. I mean, it's too thick, it's too ugly, a big nut on there, just don't like the idea. So it's time for a plan B. So for plan B, I've taken apart an indicator to see how it all goes together. So here we've got the body with a hole in the side, and here we've got the stem that goes into the body like that. So at the end of the stem, it's got a step which steps down from about 10mm to 8mm, which is then threaded. So that goes into the body like that. There's a nut on the inside, and that's the way it goes together. So what I want to do is mimic the end of this stem on a long tube, so I can fit the indicator straight on the end of that tube and then fit it to the bike, and I think that would look a lot neater. Therefore I had a look around, and I did find this aluminium tube here, which is I think it's 10mm outer. So I should be able to put a M8 thread on the inside. Hopefully that will look okay, and then get this welded to the aluminium bracket on the bike. I mean, ideally I could do with it being a bit thicker really, so that it's a bit thicker, because I am taking off quite a lot of meat off the ends for the thread, but I think it should be okay. I mean, the indicators aren't particularly very heavy, so I don't think they're going to break off or anything. So therefore I've dug out my M8 tap here, so I'm going to tap out a thread on each end of this aluminium rod, and hopefully it'll look okay when I'm finished. So let's get started. Oh, and I forgot to mention that to mimic the end of the stem, which by the way has a hole in it, what I've got to do is, once I've tapped a thread on the inside of this tube, I'm going to screw in a bolt sort of halfway in like that. Of course it won't have the end on it, I'll just cut it off, and that bolt will have to be drilled all the way through to put a hole in it to allow the wire to pass through. So that's sort of the way it's going to work. But first I've got to drill out this hole here, make it a bit wider so the tap can fit in just right. And so this is a 6.5mm drill, which should open up the tube just right, and now what I've got to do is to drill a straight line, which isn't always easy. Right, so that's at 6.5mm now. Luckily it's only aluminium, it's very easy to cut, unlike steel. In particular stainless steel is a nightmare, but aluminium's easy. It's actually turning in the vise, which we don't want. I don't want to crush it too much because I don't want to damage the blooming aluminium, but we'll just do a bit more. That's better. Go forward a little bit and then wind it back to remove the swarf. That's what we should do. Alright, so there's one done. And now we've got the other side. And then the tricky bit is going to be to drill a hole in a stainless steel bolt. But I think I'll leave that to Jeff to do because he's got a drill press and I haven't. And so I'll get those two bolts drilled out tomorrow when I go and see Jeff in his workshop. But in the meantime, I want to investigate further and try and work out why I'm not getting a spark at the spark plug. Right, so there's the cover off. Let's see what we can find on the points. Well, obviously we've got 2 points, one for each cylinder. Everything looks okay, can't see anything obviously wrong. There is, hang on, yeah, this red wire here seems to have a bit of a bare wire, as indeed does the black, but I don't think that's really a problem. It can't touch anything. I don't have a problem with that. Yeah, the red and the green come from the coil, and then we have the black wire here, which is going to the condenser. So let me do some checks. I'll get my multimeter out and we'll see what we can find, but on first inspection there's no obvious faults or missing parts on this set of points. And so as I look at that points ignition system on the bike, I'm getting a very strong sense of deja vu, because not long ago I had the same sort of problems with the point system on my Kawasaki Z650, and I replaced everything. I replaced the coils and the HT leads and the points themselves and the condenser, and I still had problems with it. So in the end I took it all out and replaced that old-fashioned points ignition system with an aftermarket one, which is fully electronic by Dynatech. Once I've done that, got a fantastic spark and the bike ran fine. So I am going to do exactly the same thing with this system. I'm going to rip out that old horrible point system and I'm going to replace it with a fully electronic system by Dynatech. And as luck would have it, they make a system for my bike, and as further luck would have it, on the American site it's currently 20% off. So I've just ordered one, and it should hopefully be here, I don't know, in a week or 10 days. Depends, I guess, how fast things come over the Atlantic. But when it arrives, I shall have great fun ripping out that damn point system and replacing it with a brand new Dynatech system. It is a slightly different system from the one fitted to my Kawasaki, because that was a Dyna S system. This one's a Dynatech 3 system, and the difference is that all the computer power, if you like, was built into the plate, which replaces the backing plate on the points. Whereas with this system, which I'm fitting into the Guzzi, it also has a new plate and sensor and so on, but it also has a little black box separate, which you need to find a home for on your bike. And normally they fit it just underneath the seat here, but on my bike that place is already taken by the coils, so I'll have some fun trying to find a home for that little black box, but I'm sure we'll work something out. So while I'm waiting for that part to turn up, what shall I do next? Well, apart of course sorting out the front indicators, I think I'll remove the carburetors, take them apart, put them in my ultrasonic cleaner, get them all clean and check them out and make sure everything's fine, rebuild them and get them back on the bike in time to fit that new Dynatech system. And after I've done all that, hopefully, double fingers crossed, the engine might fire up. And so to make a start, we'll remove the carbs from the engine, and that shouldn't take too long. Just loosen off these clamps like so. It should just come out, I hope. There we go. Come on. There you go. So there's one carb off. And now take it apart, get it all clean. Now, these carbs have been blasted about 10 years ago, but I didn't really do anything to the internals. I just kind of looked at it. Yeah, it looks pretty clean. Leave it at that. But now I've got my new ultrasonic cleaner, I think we'll put them in the bath and hopefully get it all clean, not only on the outside, but on the inside too. And so, as I just mentioned, I did take these carbs apart and get the bodies blasted and fitted new parts. But that was about 10 years ago, and 10 years in my damp garage haven't done these carbs much of a favour. See here where these nuts and fasteners have gone rusty, got some corrosion here on the aluminium velocity stack, a bit of corrosion there. So yeah, it's not doing too well. So I'm not quite sure what state these will be in on the inside. So what I'm going to do is we'll take them all apart, get the bodies cleaned in my new ultrasonic cleaner, and then rebuild them, hopefully with some new parts. You can buy rebuild kits for these, you know, no problem, they're not too expensive. And so yeah, hopefully we can get them looking as good as new. Now, these carbs and the engine itself have done something like 39,000 miles, which shouldn't be that much when it comes to old Guzzis. But I did have somebody tell me a long time ago that he thought these carbs were pretty worn for the mileage. So who knows, perhaps I'll have to replace them at some point, but I'm not doing that just yet. So there you go, look, a bit of rubbish inside there. Only just a bit of corrosion. It's not too bad. And here we have the floats. Everything looks reasonable, as it should be, because I cleaned them 10 years ago and they've not really done anything since then. But anyway, I'll now carry on, take it all apart and get all these parts cleaned up in my new, as I say, my new ultrasonic cleaner, and then we'll go on from there. And so now I've taken apart both carbs and they're going to spend about half an hour in the sonic cleaner. I keep all the small parts, the small jets and so on, in these Ziploc bags. Still works, as long as it's full of liquid, you're okay. So we'll pop that in there like that, and we'll turn it on. So here goes. And so now, with the carbs out of the sonic cleaner and washed down, I can't say they look much different, but hopefully it's helped. So now it's just a question of putting all the jets and so on back in the carb and getting the carbs back on the bike. However, I've just found a small problem. A very small problem, but a problem nevertheless. So here we have two mixture screws which go into each carb. Look at this one here, it's got a little O-ring on the end of it, whereas this one, the O-ring is missing. And that's because it fell apart when I tried to pick it up and put it back in the carb. So I'm now lacking one little O-ring. And so what I've now pretty much finished reassembling the carbs, I've now got to wait because I need that little O-ring to fit that mixture screw back in the carbs. And I don't think this little O-ring is available on its own, so I need to buy a complete rebuild kit for a carb. And because one little O-ring's failed, I suspect that other O-rings might fail as well, so I'm going to buy 2 rebuild kits and use them on these 2 carbs so I know everything inside is brand new and won't fail in the future. So the rebuild and fitting of the carbs back on the bike will have to wait a few days, but that's okay because I'm still waiting for the new ignition system to arrive from America, and that should be here in about a week's time. Right, here we are at Jeff's workshop. I've just come to collect a couple of things and hopefully solve a problem with one of my carburetors that occurred the other day. It's quite a tricky problem, but we'll go into that in a minute. But the first thing is the work on the front indicator mount is hopefully now finished. So if we grab that. Oops. Right. Yeah, it's not that bad.
It's not that.
No, that's a fillet.
That's a Harley Davidson indicator mount.
No, it's not. Right.
And 2 little.
Yeah, we've got 2 steel.
There's 2 holes still on there.
We've got 2 bits of studs here with a hole all the way through them, which screw into my aluminium.
I think we're going to have to Loctite them.
Yeah. Well, I may still have to cut it in half to shorten it.
That's a 4mm hole in there, yes, so that's more than enough for the wire. Mind you, you're going to have to put the connectors on after you've put the wire through, aren't you?
Don't worry.
So that's going to be.
So that's now done. So the question is, how do we get the wires from that end out of the middle? The original Moto Guzzi method was just to cut it in half and have a gap. So I could do that and then get these 2 halves welded onto the aluminium plate it's going to live on. Or I could just grind out a hollow in the centre of this bar to reveal the hole beneath and get the wires out that way. I've not decided yet which one to do. But the second job has been a bit of an issue, so let me grab that and I'll explain what's going on. So here we have one of my carburetors, and when I was rebuilding it there was a brass fitment that goes into this screw hole here. Screwed it in, wouldn't screw in, just wouldn't start. What I did, it wouldn't go in. I thought, what the heck, it came out but it wouldn't go in. So then I got the other screw, the other brass fitment from the other carburetor and tried it, still wouldn't fit. I then took this brass fitment and tried it in the other carb, it went in no problem. And that means the issue is with this carb body and this little thread in this hole. So, having inspected it, it turns out it's not a 10mm, it's not an 8mm, it's a 9mm hole, an M9. So, we think it's an M9 by 1. Yeah?
No, 1.25.
Oh, it's 1.25. So okay. So because I wasn't sure, I actually bought myself 2 different taps, an M9 by 1 and an M9 by 1.25. It's only a cheap pair, but it's only got to work once just to clean out this thread. And hopefully, once we've done that, the brass fitment will go in. In fact, the brass fitment's for the part of the accelerator pump mechanism, so I hope it's going to work. So I'll actually show you a close-up in a minute of the problem, because right now you're a bit far away. In fact, what we'll do now is I'll move the camera around here and we can see what's going on.
Around here.
A bit closer, yeah.
There's a smell of Michael Winners.
Yeah, oh god, yeah, the smell.
Right,
so let's go and get the camera. We can zoom in on what's going on. Is it going in?
Trying to do it by
hand, is not
hand.
It's just that first part of the thread, isn't it?
It started to pick up there. It feels like it's caught, but the question is,
do you force it?
You're hoping it's picked up level, you know, with the thread.
Yes.
Now the question is now, do we actually put the tap wrench on it and see? I can't turn it anymore.
We'll see if now the brass fitment will fit. Now you just put that in for the first turn. I believe it was just the first part of the thread that was damaged. Hang on, let's just do that.
I don't think that's gonna. See, the tap won't go in, so I obviously don't think that. No,
it just turns, doesn't it?
Some things it's...
Yeah, I think you have to force it then. Get your tap wrench out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'll just have to get a new bloody body. I've got everything else, so I just need the body. Or I can buy a brand new carb at 315 quid, which I'd rather not do.
See there, it's
just catching, yeah. I think you got.
I'm hoping it's not bottomed out.
Well, if it fails, it fails.
Right, that's gone in there.
Good.
On, and then we've got some air to blow it out then.
Okay.
Don't want any fragments in there picking up and
no
causing a problem. That now should,
I hope, go in there.
clean, isn't it? Yeah. Ooh.
Yes, that's better.
There we go.
Great stuff. So that saved the day.
Right.
That's now sorted,
I
hopefully.
don't know how tight you're supposed to put them.
Not very tight.
Yeah.
Just with a screwdriver tight.
That.
Yeah, brilliant. Right, so now I need to get that home, rebuild it with all new O-rings and get it back on the bike.
Yeah.
Well, you can keep them for the time being. I don't think I need some M9 taps. Put it in the pile.
Do you want me to put
You might need it one day. If you ever got to do a Delotto carb again,
can stick them in there. If
yeah,
you,
yeah.
I had a set at one point, and
They've gone somewhere.
I don't know. And
someone borrowed them and you've never ever seen them
I
again.
got them, and I thought I'll never need them, but I always had them. And someone's probably said, "Oh, could you?"
I've got a Delotto carb. Let me fix it.
No, I've probably lent them
somebody and they've gone.
loads of stuff over the years.
Well, now I've lent you mine, so you're sorted. Right, great stuff. And now I've got to continue drinking my cup of tea.
Ah, well.